Good afternoon and welcome to the episode of the Ad Drop Podcast. Well, you know what it is. It's Wednesday. It's time to get smarter. He is Alsegundo's favorite son since birth, basically, and the pride of Cal State Northridge. Also, the managing editor of the best college football site out there. Last word on college football. My guy Tony Siracusa. Tony, what's going on, man?
I appreciate that, man. And just because, facts matter to me, you know how I harp about that. Last word, we are about details and facts. We don't put out a bunch of wackadoodle garbage. So then I have to say the whatever it was you called me, the pride of El Segundo or whatever
Uh-huh.
since birth. I didn't move there until I was two.
Well, the
So
the pride of Alsegundo says toddlerhood. There you go.
since I was born in neighboring Redondo Beach and lived there for the
Nice.
first.
That is nice.
I don't
Now,
recall anything about any of it, and then moved to El Segundo when we were two.
as we get into the what was cool about the Big 12 Media Day, one of the first things we need to
Yeah.
give a shout out to our guy, Sheehan. Sheehan, he, as we know,
Oh.
wrote the great article on Texas Tech. One thing I noticed
Mhm.
about Sheehan tweeted a picture of himself wearing perhaps the coolest sport blazer I've ever seen. When you talk to him, get me his Taylor's
Mhm.
number. I want that blazer.
I gotta tell you, man, my boy put some effort into his wardrobe. Um, I have seen probably no fewer than a dozen different sport coats along that same line with the color. I gotta tell you, man, it takes a man of a certain confidence to be able to wear that. I am not that man, but Shahan is, and I give him all due props for him, man. He brings it. He brings it in the sartorial
Splendor.
department. Yeah,
Man,
absolutely.
man is cleaner than holy water. It is pristine. Now, when you think of the Big 12 Media Days, there's
Sure.
always what was your vibe going in and what were your takeaways?
My takeaways. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we talked about, with the commissioner yesterday and the state of the conference kind of thing, and talking a lot about doubling down on the idea of the 5-11 format for the playoffs, right? And talking about how it probably doesn't even really help um, the Big 12 right now, but because they may only get one in, but it was about playing for your playoff spots, not having given to you, like the 4-4-2-2-1. A lot of the coaches are in on that as well. They're on board with it. Um, it was interesting today, as you and I record this on a Wednesday, and today it was interesting. There were some numbers that jump out that had to really sit back and make sure you heard it right. Mike Gundy, the Oklahoma State coach. First of all, you've covered conference media days before. I've covered many of them before. You're used to seeing the coaches in their suit and tie, generally a color scheme that matches the school colors, right?
Mhm.
Um, except Gundy, who showed up in some slacks and a polo shirt and unshaven. Looks like the man's in dire need of a few days off before fall camp starts. It was you're looking at him going, "Yeah, you all right there, coach?" Or Kyle Whittingham, the Utah coach, who had a black turtleneck and a dark blue blazer, with his slick back, salt and pepper hair. Looked like he was right after Big 12 Media Days. He was headed to his favorite, jazz nightclub. Here's some pan flute music or something like that. Or what was it in that Ron Burgundy music? Jazz flute, right? In the
Flute.
Ron Burgundy movie, right?
Yes.
But Gundy talked about, look, last year was a disaster for Oklahoma State. especially being picked by the media to be so high. And by the way, in case your audience hasn't caught on to this, there is no preseason poll for the Big 12. The conference, the media, the coaches all dropped it. There was a feeling that it served as a disadvantage to Arizona State, which was picked 16th, wound up winning the conference last year, but having to overcome perception hurdles. And was that was a big theme of yesterday is the Big 12 conference needs to own its perception, what it is, enhance it, grow it. That because right now the Big Ten and the SEC own the perception wars. And so the Big 12 needs to do more is a big theme from Tuesday. But back to Gundy. Gundy talked about, had to make a lot of changes, made changes on the coaching staff. Roster management was the big topic for Gundy because listen to these numbers. He has 65 new players on the roster as of June. Now, take a step back. Let's pause for a moment. Not 65 players from new players compared to last year. 65 new players since June. That means transfer portal players that came in April and May and high school recruits who were not early enrollees. They were not there for spring camp. He's got 65 players on this roster that he will not even see practice for the first time until August, 3 weeks before the season starts. He's got 65% of the players on this year's team were not on last year's team. That's just, he got hit hard by the transfer portal, had a handful of players that went to the NFL. But, and all this came about because he was asked, do players look at last year's record and use that as motivation to be better this year? His answer was, I don't have that many players on the roster who were even here last year to even care about what last year's record was. 65 new players since June. That number just floored me. You've got a scholarship limit of 105. He figures he's got another 10 walk-on players. So 115 total. More than half of his team is just now coming in for the first time. They're just moving onto campus like last week. It seemed insane. One of the bright spots, there was the typical stuff from like Rich Rod going back to West Virginia. He said it's kind of funny. Usually when you get a new job, it takes 6 to 9 months to get acclimated to everything. He said this took me about 6 to 9 minutes because I've been there before. I know my way around campus. But as I go through some of the notes that I've got here, because we're putting together a couple pieces on day 2, was seeing Deion. I gotta tell you, man, it was cool. It really was because he's been in bad health. And there were a couple of those pop up little blog sites that people write just because they have a laptop and need something to do with their day that have been reporting that he was in such bad health he wasn't going to be at Big 12 media. And there he was, and all of his sartorial splendor, as a matter of fact, wearing a suit, but a black Colorado logo t-shirt, all the change. Clean shaven, though. You've seen him lately, right? He had the gray beard and everything. Clean shaven, took the sunglasses off for the press conference. He was in good prime form. Talked about a lot of love. He was giving out a lot of love. He kept saying that, a lot of love to Brett Yormark, the commissioner, to the other coaches who were calling him over the last 2 months, checking in on his health, to players' families, to the media, to a lot of love for everybody. He was in a darn good mood. And it was interesting because someone asked him about his newfound admiration for Texas Tech coach Joey McGuire. And he said, "Oh, I love Joey McGuire. Great coach. Love what he's doing at Texas Tech." And he's like, "I love Joey." And he shouts, "Joey got some money."
Ah,
Because, of course, that has been the topic of, Cody Campbell, the booster, and a new $250 million football training facility and the money for the football program. And he shouts, "Joey got some money." He says, "But I love me some Joey McGuire." And he said, "Hey, Joey, can you send me a few of those dollars? We need some." You know, he was just he was in rare form. He said, "Look, here's the thing." He said, "People complain." He said, "If I had all that money coming in, people would be yakking at me about abusing the system and whatever." And he said, "But Joey doesn't. It's okay. So I'm going to love Joey." And he went on talking about changes that he'd like to see in the game. It was interesting. He was very friendly with the media, and he's had a cross relationship with a lot of members of the media. And I'm not going to name names, but there was a reporter from a certain well-known outlet recently purchased by the New York Times. We'll leave it at that. Um, and he got past this question. He said, "From the Athletic," he said, "Oh man, you guys have done me wrong so many times." And he said, "But I like you, so I'm going to answer your question because I got love." And but anyway, someone had asked about changes he wanted to see, and some of them are viable, some of them aren't, some of them are amusing. He wants to see a salary cap for NIL slash the collective slash whatever, and you can't. The NIL, you cannot. It is against federal law to put a cap on what someone can make unless it is so stated in their contract. So, in terms of legitimate NIL money, people can make as much as someone is willing to pay them for the use of their name, image, and likeness. But he said, things have gotten so out of hand. He said, we need better guardrails for things like the transfer portal and getting to people who are breaking the rules. He said, "How are reporters getting information that one of my players is getting offered $5 million from another school when that player's not even in the portal?" And he said, maybe they were offered that. And of course, we talked a week or two ago about the Wisconsin lawsuit against Miami and the tampering. And so you want that bit. But here's the one that made me chuckle. You know what he's really, really upset about? The football pants that players are allowed to wear. Because surely you've noticed knee pads are not required for all positions anymore. And he said they're basically wearing the equivalent of biker shorts, of biking
wow.
shorts with a thigh pad in there. And he said it's stupid. And he said, and I want rules that make them wear full pants again.
I
I'm like,
agree.
all right, Deion, I got you on that one. I'm with you there. Um, but it was interesting. He talked about it's because you and I talked about when we covered the Big 12 and how much this is be a transformational year for Colorado without these guys that he had coached for 4 years, like Travis Hunter and his son Shador. And he said, "Well, I know we'll have some people watching us." He said, "Because here's the thing," and this was one of his closing comments. He said, "You want to see us win, you want to see us lose, you just want to see us." And he's not wrong. That's why Colorado hired him. And that's why, the 3 hour long pregame shows made a habit of camping out in Boulder, 3, 4, 5 Saturdays a year for the last 2 years. So, he didn't want to talk about his health, and that's fine. It's his private story, but he certainly looked well, and obviously, we hope he is well.
Of course. I mean, Deion is, from what you said, it seems like he is settling into his role as a head coach of a
Yeah.
major college football school.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't always agree with him, and I've called him
same.
out on stuff, and I've called him out for not protecting players who got dumped from his first two rosters, not taking care of scholarships if they wanted to stay, things like that. I've called him out on stuff, but you know, having Dion at a microphone is certainly good for the college football media in which you and I earn our keep.
Fair, and that is true. Now, as we take a look at the ACC to me, what would be if you look at the teams and you look at how it's going to shake out, what's your first take on the conference as a whole, as far as from a football standpoint?
It continues to be a top heavy conference. It is not, we talked about the Big 12, five, maybe six teams that could compete for those two spots in the conference championship game. ACC is a top heavy conference. You've got three, maybe four teams that can compete for those two spots. Really? And honestly, you know what? I'm gonna take a step back from that. No, you don't. You have three teams that can compete for the second spot in the conference championship game. The first one's already taken because Clemson's getting there. It's a matter of who else is going to get there. Um, it's not balanced throughout. Nobody thinks there's going to be, an upstart Virginia team, an upstart North Carolina team, or Syracuse team. Um, you know, I'll have their wins. Syracuse, look, Fran Brown did a great job at Syracuse last year, but he also had a terrific quarterback, slinging the ball all over the place. He doesn't have that now. So it's top heavy. That's to the detriment of the conference, but that's the reality of where it is right now.
Exactly. It's a conference that it's Clemson and pretty much everyone else at this point.
It is. It is. It is. And I know, and we'll talk about the teams that, we think you and I think can be competitive. But I really think that, you look at Clemson and everyone, to me, Clemson should be one of the top 5 to 6 teams in the country this year. Should be. How they play throughout the season, whether they get there, tough to say. Um, but you look at the other teams that you and I have in our top five, as it were. I've got Louisville in there as the fifth. Does anyone think Louisville's going to compete for a national championship? No, of course not. That's ridiculous. They've got probably one of the best running backs, or the best running back in the conference, in Isaac Brown. But look, I mean, he had 1,100 rushing yards, but they're relying on Miller Moss, the USC transfer, as their quarterback. Had a better reputation in high school than he does in college as a quarterback. Um, the defense has been a debacle for the past couple of years at Louisville. They got some good guys, the transfer portal. They got Clev Lubin from Coastal Carolina, and they got JoJo Evans, a safety from Florida International, who's good. They got some good corners, but there's just so much unknown on that defense. And you're looking at it, they got 4 new wideouts on offense. You can't just be Isaac Brown and, a halfway deep. So can they compete for the conference championship? They can be in a race for a while, but that certainly doesn't make you a national team, right? Not even
No.
close.
When I look at,
I've
sorry, I go
got,
ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
You mentioned Miller Moss. I know that
Yeah,
moss doesn't grow on your feet, and a Rolling Stone gathers no moss, but moss can't throw past the stick. So it's just one of those things that
right.
I don't see it with Louisville. But Who is your fifth team?
Well, Louisville's my fifth team. So Georgia Tech is my fourth team. I like Brent Key as the coach. He's in his fifth year there, and I really like him. They have this habit of knocking off the teams above them in the conference. Um, I like Haynes King as the quarterback just because no one has figured out a defense yet to stop him. Look, he's not going to put up huge numbers throwing the ball. Georgia Tech doesn't throw the ball that much. They still run a hybrid of the triple option. He only threw for 2,100 yards last year, but he threw at a 71% completion rate. And he had 11 rushing touchdowns with his 14 throwing touchdowns. So the guy's dangerous. Miami certainly hasn't figured out a way to stop him. So, ask Mario Cristobal about him and what they think they should be doing. Um, and by the way, Georgia Tech doesn't have to play Miami this year, so Cristobal gets a break. Um, but they've got a good running back in Jamal Haynes, who had 1,000 yards rushing. They had to bring in a lot of transfers on defense, um, because they lost 200 plus snaps, and they only had 7 of the 19 defenders with 200 plus snaps on that side of the ball come back this year. So they lost 12 key players. So it was pretty significant. They brought in uh, some tackles, Matthew Alexander from Central Florida and Akilo Stone from Ole Miss on the defensive side of the ball. They brought in a pretty decent cornerback in Kelvin Hill from UAB. So they've tried loading up. They only have to play 2 high-end teams this year. We already said they don't have to play Miami. They only have to play 2 high-end conference games. Well, not even conference games, frankly, just 2 high-end games. They play Clemson at home in week 3, and then of course they end the season against Georgia Tech. But they're playing Pitt, they're playing Boston College, they're playing NC State. They got Syracuse at home. Um, they're playing Gardner Webb early on. They are playing Colorado, so it'll be interesting. But really, there's only 2 games where you look at it and say, man, I don't know if they can win. And frankly, if you're Georgia, you shouldn't be overlooking Georgia Tech, because what was that game? 4 overtimes last year for Georgia to beat them by 2 points. So it's I like Georgia Tech because they can beat some teams. You just don't know how many teams that they can really take care of, that they should be taking care of. You look at something like where they can easily be playing really well and then slip up at Boston College in November in a game they should win. That would be a very typical Georgia Tech thing to do. But again, in the ACC conference that doesn't have a tremendous amount of depth, this is Georgia Tech's a team that can play a factor in the race. I've got SMU third, uh, mostly because of Kevin Jennings, the quarterback. Took over 2 weeks into the season last year, threw for 3,200 yards. Could have, should have beaten Clemson in the conference championship game. Lost on a field goal on the very last play of the game. But Rhett Lashley did a good job with the portal and the high school recruiting. He brought in TJ Harden from UCLA as a good running back. So the offense is good. They've got some non-conference battles with Baylor and with TCU. And they've got to play all 3 of the teams that we have determined are, title contenders. Louisville, I guess. And then Clemson on the road, and they play Miami at home. So they're going to need some help defensively up front. Offense should be pretty good. Again, they can be a factor. I don't know if they can get there.
I know you mentioned Tech, well, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech,
Yeah.
when I look at Hayes King reminds
Mm-hmm.
me of, you're a baseball guy.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Sparks and Russ Springer. What do they have in common?
Russ Springer and Steve Sparks. Man, that's good. I barely remember Steve Sparks. I remember Russ Springer, but what
They,
did they have in common?
they were knuckleball pitchers for the Angels.
Uh,
They they didn't look like they would be able to do a whole lot, but when they stepped
right.
on the field, they were tremendously effective.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
why I see Hayes King.
Springer more so than I'm not giving a big nod to Steve Sparks, but Springer, sure, why not?
And when I see them, when I see Hayes King, it's not pretty. It is never pretty,
Right.
but it's
Right.
effective. And when he's on the field, even under a rush, he looks so composed. Even though he knows, I know, his teammates, coordinators, that he's playing with an offense. Like when they beat Miami, he's playing against a team that, on paper, athletically far superior. He doesn't care.
Absolutely. Nope.
When they went into North Carolina and embarrassed Drake May, they didn't
Yep.
care.
Nope. He keeps them
And
in the game at all times. He really does. You're not going to see them gain. You're going to see them lose. You're not going to see them get blown out by anybody, because he keeps them in the game.
and you mentioned Kevin Jennings at SMU. Like you said, they had Clemson. They had them. It just,
They did.
but I like the fact that Lashley has tried to build a program when Chad Morris botched it, and you just saw the worst version of SMU, but you see Lashley with his attention to detail and the
Hmm.
fact that SMU they're a threat. They probably won't be Clemson, but they're a threat. In the
They
opening,
are. You're going to have some of the young guys step up on defense, guys who've been relatively unproven. The offense is there. They've got talent at receiver. They're new receivers, but there's enough talent. Um, you know, can Kevin Jennings throw for another 3,100 yards? Yeah, probably. He's a pretty decent quarterback. But the defense is a concern. You're going to have to see some of the newbies and some of the youngsters step up a little better.
exactly. You mentioned Carolina as far as any open. Is it me or do I see them as being a 4-win team, 4 or 5 wins? I just don't see it this year.
Yeah, no, they don't have it. I mean, they really don't. They had some moderate success in the portal because it was about, hey, go play for Bill Belichick, and that's pretty cool. But you look at the schedule, and they got to play Clemson. They get Clemson at home. They got to play on the road at Syracuse. The schedule isn't that hard. They got to play TCU. I don't like them against TCU. I really don't. They get to play at UNC Charlotte. You know, well, it's kind of funny to be playing at Charlotte. I mean, that stadium holds about 5,000 people. And they play Richmond, but they got to play at UCF. They like I said, they get Clemson at home. They don't have a particularly tough schedule, but I also don't think we know what level of talent is there. Because we didn't get to see spring camp. Nobody really did. And so it's a big guessing game. And so right now, if I'm guessing, I'm putting them at a 5-win season, you know?
Same. And one thing about Carolina, because of Bill Belichick being known as a yeller, screamer, aggressive, old school type coach, he's gonna walk in and say to one of the players, and I won't be surprised if a few leave during the season.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah. When playing for Bill Belichick doesn't have all the sunshine and sparkle you thought it would, when you're losing to Pitt, then he's going to have some retention problems, and we've talked about. I don't think he'll be there next year. Okay, so
no, exactly.
it's going to
Now
be a rough transition year.
it'd be a very rough transition. Now, Clemson, as we both agree, is the top choice. When I
Hmm.
look at their offseason, it's more about what they did to me personally. It's about what they did in the front office and
Hmm.
administration more than it was field. For a team and a head coach who was dead set against trying to modernize, trying to embrace the NIL and the portal issue, hiring and hiring a GM with NFL experience,
Yep.
wild. It is just, and also giving their coordinators significant raises, you keep them.
Well, he went out and got Tom Allen, remember, as the new defensive coordinator,
Hmm.
hired him away from Penn State, and that came with a big chunk of change, having to get him away. And so you're right, they spent money that they otherwise have been adverse to spending, and they didn't go major portal shopping. They've gotten a couple players over the years in the portal. You know, there's an image of Dabo never used the portal. Well, that's not true. He's gotten about 4 or 5 players out of the portal, just nobody of any significance that was going to cost them money because he was too worried about disrupting his locker room. But this is a good team. This is a really good team. Cade Klubnik, man, he stepped up last year, right? We walked into last year saying we don't know who or what Cade Klubnik is yet. And he more than proved himself. 3,600 yards passing, the 36 touchdowns, ran for another 400 plus, whatever, rushing yards. I mean, I think as we're sitting here in July and making random guesses about things, Klubnik has to be on the short list for the Heisman preseason. I think he is worthy of that consideration. Um, last year was a big deal because Dabo was under so much scrutiny for speaking out against the system. And, what was it he said years ago? He was going to quit the day players started getting paid. Well, they're getting paid and Dabo is still around. So, there's that. But they'd gone 3 years in a row without making the playoffs, the postseason, playoffs. And so he took care of that last year, won the ACC, had a very balanced offense. They don't necessarily have that this year. They lose Phil Maffa as the starting running back. It's a big deal. Likely going to have to rely on Gideon Davidson, who's a freshman. Very talented, very fast. You look at the film on this kid and great footwork. But again, a freshman. So it's going to take some patience on Dabo's part. It's going to take some work. But when you have a quarterback as good as Clemson has with Cade Klubnik, it helps out the running game a little bit. They've got TJ Moore, they've got Bryant Wesco, they've got Antonio Williams coming in as receivers. So there's a lot for Klubnik to work with. Like we talked about, the defense had slipped. It was absurdly young last year, so it didn't look very good. But he went out and he got Tom Allen. Um, he went, they've got TJ Parker, who had 11 sacks last year. Peter Woods. I really suggest people keep an eye on Peter Woods on the Clemson defense. This guy was all conference, likely an All American candidate this year. Um, so, look, they've got to play at Georgia Tech. That's a tricky game. They've got to play at Louisville. We'll see. They've got to play at South Carolina, significantly improved South Carolina team, with a really good quarterback. Beyond that, I'm not really looking at a lot of concern in their schedule. I mean, at BC, at North Carolina, home against Florida State, home against Duke. They play Furman the week before they play South Carolina. God, I hate those games. I hate those. Play them early on, man. Get it out of your system by the end of September. But of course, the one everyone's looking forward to the most is they open up against LSU. At home against LSU.
Now, in following Clemson and watching, where do you, to me,
Mhm.
I think Klubnik might be the best Clemson quarterback I've seen. And I compare him to Trevor Lawrence for a couple of ways. Klubnik is just, how to explain it? It's tough. He takes a good
Is
shot and gets up and just shakes it
he
off
is
and keeps playing.
Well, when you see him running, he's running for the sticks. He's running for that first down. You don't see him slide a lot, and I think Tabo would probably prefer that he did. He'll put his head down and make a head first dive to the sticks for the first down. So you don't see him avoiding the contact. You don't see him ducking it. Um, and he probably should a little bit more, but he is. He's a tough kid, and he's a good quarterback. Like I said, when they put him in place of DJ Uyunglele a couple of years ago, we were all like, don't know anything about this kid. Looks okay, looks all right. Went into last season with us saying, we'll see what he is. Well, guess what? He's good, and he's earned the consideration. He was always talented, but he can run an offense. There's a big difference at this level between a talented quarterback and a quarterback who can run the offense. We were just talking about Haynes King at Georgia Tech, right? Haynes King is not he's not going to play quarterback in the NFL, not with the offense he's coming from at Georgia Tech. But Haynes King can run the offense. You know, is he gonna, drop back and throw for bunt? No, that's not who and what he is. He can run his offense. That's what Klubnik does. He's not spectacular, but he's tough and he knows how to run the offense.
What do you think your expectations are for Brent Pry in Virginia Tech?
Low. Virginia keeps losing players to the portal. The replenishing is, look, I mean, Pry has been there, I'm going to say, what, 5 years now? And I like him. Very high energy guy, easy guy to like. But between the portal and the high school recruiting, you just don't see it. You just don't. You're not getting the difference maker players. Virginia Tech is a great environment for college football. It's a great place to go play. Um, People are considering, Blacksburg, Virginia. I got news for you, man. It's a beautiful campus. It's a great area. And the environment there, I've been there. The environment there on a Saturday is just over the top. But I don't know if it's that they don't have the money to spend or they don't want to spend the money. The collective at Virginia Tech has never been a big deal maker. Maybe they get a better shot now with the revenue sharing and a little bit more of an even playing field, at least in terms of that. Um, but you just don't see the breakthrough talent going to Virginia Tech.
Now, one of the teams that we discussed is Miami and Mario
Yep.
Cristobal, where
Yep.
Carson Beck is Carson Beck is the Jarrett Stidham of Mac Jones's. He's a very, at times, good college quarterback, but
Mhm.
at times is the key to me because some guys just don't have it in big moments. And I think that playing at Georgia concealed a lot of his flaws.
Perhaps. I think we don't know who Carson Beck is going to be this year. And I know that may sound like, I've lost my mind. I mean, guy threw for 3,000 yards last year. Yeah, but he was playing in an offense that relied on him to be the drop back passer that he is. Miami has to reinvent its offense this year because they went out and got Carson Beck. They had Cam Ward last year who could improvise. And sorry, I know you're hearing a lot of background noise.
Sorry.
Our newly adopted kitten has decided that your show is a good time to start playing with all of her new toys.
Welcome.
Uh, yeah, Sadie over here playing with the other two mooks, but they've decided it's a good time to destroy my office. Um, Cam Ward would improvise. That made it hard for the offensive line because you never knew what this guy was going to do, but you get used to a mobile quarterback who you constantly have to be ready to move with him. That's not that's not Carson Beck at all. He's not a mobile quarterback. You're going to have Miami's offense is going to have to convert to a drop back pro style offense after years of recruiting offensive linemen who run a spread offense. It's a dramatic difference. You have to reformulate how the offensive line works, how it schemes. So Carson Beck has a good arm. Carson Beck will get drafted into the NFL in the mid to late rounds in a year. Um, but I don't think we know what the Miami version of Carson Beck is. He's got the offense has a lot of potential, but they lost Xavier Restrepo, one of the best receivers in Miami history. They went on and got CJ Daniels from LSU. That was a big get, 500 receiving yards last year at LSU, and he's good. I think everybody needs to keep an eye on this kid, Malachi Tony. He's a young receiver, a freshman. Um, Cristobal will tell you he was one of the best players at all of spring camp. So keep an eye out, on this kid. They hit the portal hard. Obviously, they spent a lot of money on Beck. They made some staff changes. But you already know my thoughts on Mario Cristobal.
Yeah.
They've been they've been made abundantly clear. Good recruiter, really good recruiter. Costs Miami 1 to 2 games a year every year, just as he did at Oregon. With coaching mistakes, clock management mistakes, strategy mistakes. Um, the schedule works out heavily, heavily in their favor. They open up against Notre Dame. Oh man, I love seeing Notre Dame against Miami. Matter of fact, I think the week of that game, I'm going to go back and watch that 30 for 30 on Catholics versus convicts just to get myself ready for the game. See Jimmy Johnson and Lou Holtz playing at each other again, just to get myself ready. But then they've got Bethune-Cookman and they've got USF. They actually have a weird stretch in their schedule where they only play one game in 3 weeks.
Jeez.
They have a bye. They have a bye, then they play Florida State and then another bye. And they don't have to play Clemson this year until presumably the conference championship game. With all the money Miami spent, with all the investment, with the new assistant coaches and the coordinator, you have to get to double-digit wins and a trip to the ACC championship game. If you're Mario Cristobal, you have to. If you don't do it now, when? We have given you all of this money to hit the portal, and they hit the portal hard. You have to get to 10 wins and the conference championship game. Have to.
Thinking in the ACC, so Bubba Cunningham will step down next year, and they named
Yes.
Steve Newmark, who
Yep.
is the president of the Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing Team, a NASCAR team president.
Yes.
Why? I mean, I understand the whole sponsorship thing, but he's not an athletics guy.
No, he's not. He's an administrative guy. He's a guy who is going to play a bigger role in the management of the University of North Carolina athletics as a business enterprise than as an athletic department. As taking a look at our sponsor deals, taking a look at how we spend our revenue sharing, taking a look at our NIL opportunities and why local businesses aren't spending more with us. It's a business move, not an athletic department.
I get the understand, but it's just like at least Bubba he had a athletics background. Just
Bubba's a
I
good athletic director, frankly, but Bubba was told to sit down and shut up with the
hmm
Bill Belichick hire.
hmm
And so it's ironic that in all likelihood, Belichick and Bubba will be leaving within a handful of months of each other.
I know that they said he's going to transition to a senior advisory role. I don't see it.
That means you show up at fundraising events and shake some hands and ask for some money and make some phone calls. And that's what Dave Clawson is doing at Wake Forest right now. His when he retired, they kept him around. John Curry, the athletic director, kept him around as an advisor. gave him an office there, which by all accounts, Clausen is rarely in. He likes working from home. Um, he got to go on an actual vacation this summer for the first time in goodness knows how long. And then his contract kicked in again on July 1st as a senior advisor on he is basically a senior fundraiser. He's going to businesses asking them to participate in NIL with players and to try and boost the financial opportunities for those at Wake Forest. It's going to be a pretty typical job for coaches and administrators who quit because the hierarchy, the structure in college sports is much different than what you and I grew up with, right? You had the coaches who answered to the athletic director, who answered to the school president. But now we got general managers and we got committees and we've got we've got a whole set of layers between the president or chancellor of a university and everyone in the athletic department. And a lot more jobs available or jobs being made up in order to get people in there in an administrative standpoint.
I mean, it's just weird watching Carolina make these moves because it just out. It's funny that their Olympic sports are outpacing their basketball and football
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
far between soccer, field hockey, tennis. And it's just it's interesting to watch a school that pretty much builds itself on basketball, one, not be good at it anymore, and two, have basketball be, I know it's the one they pride themselves on the most, but it's the one that they've on the last couple of years had the least success with.
Right. Look, it is going to be considered a basketball school because it just is. I don't care how much, Stoops wins at Kentucky football. It's a basketball school because the expectations are different. And it's the same with North Carolina. The expectations for basketball are different. It's a basketball school, but the football brings in a lot of money. And, the stadium is packed most Saturdays. And so it's a revenue source which helps basketball. It's look, it's the school of Michael Jordan and James Worthy and Sam Perkins and Dean Smith and on and on and on. So it's a basketball school.
Like
We'll go back. It's the school of Phil Ford. How's that? We'll go back even further. Uh,
school of Larry
so
Brown.
it is the school of Larry Brown, the much traveled Larry Brown. Um, so it's just is always going to be, the Dean Dome and all of those things. Most people couldn't name the football stadium at North Carolina because who cares? But
Exactly.
the Dean Dome.
Larry Brown is the Odysseus of basketball.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is. Had
What?
a had a
So go ahead.
good run had a good very short run at UCLA. Got the When you look at the 1980 national championship, you will not see who Louisville beat because it was UCLA and they had to vacate it because of Larry Brown infractions.
Oh,
Um, and they had to vacate it. That was the team with Kiki Vandeweghe and Michael Holton and Rod Foster and guys like that. And then, gosh, I don't even remember what order it was, but he went to Kansas. He won a national championship at Kansas. He was going to come back to UCLA. He was offered the job. I'm going to say post Larry Farmer because they had Walt Hazard, Larry Farmer. I don't remember who else, but I'm going to say it was post Farmer. And it was on the plane coming to Los Angeles to take the UCLA job a second time. And as soon as Atlanta, he never got off the plane. He went back to Kansas and he wanted to stay at Kansas. And then about 2 months later, took over the San Antonio Spurs. So Larry moved around.
like
Does anyone
Spurs.
even remember that he coached at SMU? He
That was
coached
his
the
last job,
SMU
right?
basketball team. It was coached SMU into the NCAA tournament a few years ago where they got beat by UCLA.
They had a guy named Emmanuel Mudiay, the point
Yep,
guard.
that's right. That's right.
Random, but it's true. What's coming up on Last Word, Tone?
Oh man, we are, you know how it goes this time of year. We got conference media days. We got a lot of coverage of the Big 12 media days. We got some previews of next week's SEC media days in Atlanta. We got some team position breakdowns. So we got a lot going on. You can go to lastwordonsports.com, click on the college football link. We've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, we've got Blue Sky, and we still have our associate editor, Kate, with the daily countdown. You can look to see who's in there, what number we're using for the countdown to the college football season.
As always, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Ad Drop Podcast.
All right, man. Be well.